Hello and welcome to Traffic Talk, a podcast from Global Traffic Technologies that brings you conversations about the latest subjects and solutions from around the public safety, law enforcement, and transit industries. Our guest on today's episode is Blake Redfield, the Traffic Systems Manager for the City of St. Cloud, Minnesota. Blake, thanks for taking time to join us today. Let's start with the listeners a sense of your work history and experience.
I've been in the transportation business now for 30 plus years, traffic engineering, traffic technician type work. And so I've pretty much seen it all, done it all. I've worked with preemption equipment basically for all 30 of those years in one form or another. And anyway, a few years back, some new products were coming on the market with GTT, and so we became interested in trying to tie preemption into snowplowing. This has always been something on the back burner, but the existing products at the time that we were looking at just didn't quite fit the needs that we were looking at until the advent of the relative priority preemption.
You recently concluded a 5-year pilot program that tested relative priority on snowplows. How did this pilot program come about?
Well, GTT is one of the equipment suppliers to Traffic Control Corporation here that has a local office in Minnesota. They had a presentation at the state maintenance expo back in, was that 2014, I believe it is now, a number of years back. And anyway, it was intriguing at the time and showing some of the possible alternatives that we could be looking at for trying to improve, reduced snowplow times on the roadway, possible improved safety features. And it was intriguing, but on the other side of the coin, there really had been very little research work done on it. There just wasn't much information available on what would, what the results would be from having this type of technology on the street.
And a pilot program is the perfect vehicle to test that, isn't it?
Right. And one of the things that did help is that through our local LRRB, LTAP group here, there was some seed money that was available. And so we were able to write a grant, and we were able to get at least enough to kind of help us out. And then the city matched the rest of the funds to get a program up and running. We wanted to do it on a relatively small scale, but yet still large enough that it would show us some viable results when the program was completed.
St. Cloud had quite a bit of experience with preemption already, correct? You've had it for a number of years, I believe.
Right. St. Cloud has had both high-level priority emergency equipment preemption, and we've also been using TSP for the last 20 years. So for transit, like I say, we had a good background in both of those worlds, but there again, we could see that really neither of those worlds fit the needs of snowplow equipment. That's where we got involved with this pilot program, and we looked at 7 intersections along a corridor that worked out really well for us.
How much did having existing infrastructure already in place help facilitate this program?
We understood preemption. We kind of knew what we were looking at as far as, what the other two types of preemption could do. Now, I will have to say we were a little daunted by the number of things that relative priority preemption. There's just a tremendous amount of flexibility with the product. And so it was a little overwhelming in some ways initially getting it set up, but once we understood it and figured out what we wanted to do with it, it really went pretty well. Just having a background in preemption did definitely help us out with trying to integrate it into the controllers and just make the system work.
What were some of the challenges in conducting this study?
One of our difficult parts of this project, and that was actually getting permission originally because of Minnesota state laws and everything on who is allowed to use what's termed as signal override equipment. It's very specific in Minnesota law as to who is allowed to use it and not use it. And that's an area that we're going to have to really look at statewide and nationwide in order to implement some of these types of devices, because we had to jump through a lot of hoops to make this happen. And so as another outcome, we would sure like to see, other agencies and even companies as yourselves help probably modify some of the state rules and regulations on some of these things, because as of right now, actually, we no longer have permission to actually use the equipment. We got done with our 5-year study, and basically we have to disband it because it's not in the state regulations at this point in time.
What were the parameters of the pilot program once you had figured out what you needed to?
Well, one of the big things was just plain and simply, how much reduced time that there would be for the snowplows out on the roadway. So we looked at it, and we tried to make it as much of a laboratory type of experiment as possible, but that can be really difficult in an outdoor environment, because in a laboratory environment, you can really control, you have a lot of controls on what you're doing with your experiment. When you have snow that's coming down at different rates, at different times of the day, different days of the week, different temperatures, there's just lots and lots of variables that we had to kind of work around. And so we looked at the important things on what we were going to have to really, look at for variables. And we kind of got it boiled down to, we really needed to know what the weather conditions were for each snow event that we were going to have during this trial period. And then we had to have a way of really monitoring how much time it was taking for the trucks to make it along the corridor during the snow plowing operation. So a couple of things that we did was we installed dash cams, fairly inexpensive dash cams that were actually quite accurate in each of the snowplow trucks, that recorded both the video and the GPS location of the vehicle throughout the route. Also, at the end of each snow event, we would go to the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. We would look at their weather data and record that. Then all of this data was put into spreadsheets so that we could have it in a standardized format that we could turn around and analyze later on. And that was what we did for a 5-year period of time.
And once you had collected all that data, what did you do with it for the analysis portion?
We looked at some of the data initially ourselves and realized that this was going to be a very major undertaking when we would get done with it 5 years down the road. But we did some initial, just rough numbers. But then we decided that to make it as fair and unbiased as possible, we actually hired the St. Cloud State University statistical group to analyze the data for us. So it would be in a completely unbiased fashion, and they could use the latest statistical methods to try to make heads or tails out of all this data that we were bringing in.
And what did they ultimately find once they had time with the data to analyze it?
Well, it was kind of interesting, because our initial findings after the first year, just in the numbers that we crunched, We came back with about a 22% time reduction for snow plowing after they went through all of their fancy statistical analysis and looking at everything. That was the exact number they came back with after 5 years of study. So our 1 year actually was quite good. Oh, and I need to back up just a little bit on part of the methodology that we used with the study too, is that as part of the study, we needed to have baseline data. So there were runs that we would send the snowplow drivers out there where they would have to keep the preemption equipment turned off in their vehicle. And so then that gave us a baseline data to work with. Now, the one caveat with that was, so the snowplow drivers got so that they really liked using the preemption equipment, and it was hard to get them to not use the preempt equipment. So ultimately, we did have quite a bit more data using the equipment than not using the equipment, but we had to make some calibration adjustments and things in the statistics. And we were able to come out still with some pretty good comparison with a relatively decent baseline that we could work with.
In terms of tangible impact, what does that 22% time savings mean?
Less exposure time out there on the roadway. The faster the guys can plow the roads, the more open they are for the general public and for other emergency vehicles that need to be out there. The one thing that is really unique about the relative priority preemption is the fact that, yes, it is giving us almost the same level of preemption as the emergency vehicles. However, it does give way or yield to conflicting emergency vehicles, such as a fire truck or a police car. And we did actually get that recorded on one or two of the videos that we were taking where we had a ambulance, I believe it was, on one of them that came through. And so then the truck drivers had to stop for the ambulance, and so it did exactly what it was supposed to do that way. And then fuel efficiency, every time we could keep those trucks moving and don't have to downshift them and get them started again. Even getting started again, you would think a big heavy snowplow truck out there would have no problem getting moving. But once they stop, sometimes if the roads are slippery, it can be difficult for them to get moving again. So if you can keep them going, it just makes it a lot easier on the driver, on the equipment. Efficiency is improved, safety is improved. We reduce the amount of time that we're actually out on the roadway. We can get the routes done quicker. So it's just an improvement all the way around as far as snow plowing goes.
And you talked about the relative portion of relative priority, but that has knock-on effects, including clearing the way faster for fire and EMS vehicles as well. Their routes are plowed quicker, and maybe that can have an effect on them as well.
Right, exactly. Once we get the roadways opened up, it's going to be safer for them as well to use the road. So it's just a win-win situation, really, for everybody with this technology.
It sounds like this study did confirm your suspicions that relative priority has utility beyond just fire and EMS and law enforcement use.
Right, absolutely. And the thing is too is I see relative priority preemption not only as an answer to, future snowplow type use, but I also see it on some other types of vehicles, like let's say a paint striper. It's difficult for a big paint machine to stop at a traffic signal. If they could be using them on their equipment, it would make it much, much better and safer for them to be out there on the street doing their thing, because it's one of those pieces of equipment that's difficult for them to stop when they're out there. And there's probably other devices that could even be used in lower levels. That's one of the things, is you can set all these different thresholds and things in it that really make it very, very flexible But it could even get to the point that if you wanted to have sanitation trucks and, other equipment like that out there that might be able to just shave a few seconds off of their route or just, reduce the number of stops that they have to do. Every time we can reduce stops, we reduce, pollution, we reduce fuel consumption, we improve safety. Every time vehicles have to transition, it becomes a safety issue. So from start to stop. If we can keep traffic flowing and still keep it efficient out there on the roadway, that's a win for everybody.
Yeah, no question about it. Well, Blake, we appreciate you coming on the pod today to share your insights and expertise and your experience with this pilot program. Thanks again for joining us on today's episode.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. And I just hope that there's other places that are interested in doing this type of work in the future.
That was Blake Redfield, Traffic Systems Manager with the Public Works Department in St. Cloud, Minnesota, detailing the findings from their 5-year study that tested the impact of relative priority on snowplows. Thanks for downloading today's inaugural episode. Until next time, I'm Bill Hupp, and this has been Traffic Talk.